Connor Sible will be familiar to many of you who dialed into the FAR conference a couple of years ago, and he's a postdoc within Fred Below's group over in the University of Illinois. I hear he's going for a tenure soon, so you know this talk will help him get there, hopefully get there. But Connor's going to talk to us around, I guess, the current and future role of resilient maize systems and the use of biologicals for that purpose. Okay, Connor, come on up.
Well, thank you very much. It sounds like we got the lavalier on. So anyone that saw Dr. Bellow or has seen Dr. Bellow knows he likes to wander, and after working with him for 7 years, you pick up some of those habits. Really happy to be here today, and especially to FAR. You know, Dr. Bellow and I have been involved in this conference now the last 3 times, and I do appreciate that I was invited back. For those that don't know the full story about that online version, Dr. Bellow was supposed to give that presentation, and you went online because of a little thing called COVID. And sure enough, Dr. Bellow caught it over in the States, and he himself got COVID, and the night before his talk, he calls me. He could barely talk on the phone, and he takes great pride in sticking to his commitments. And when he calls and says, "Can you do this talk?" Well, you know, I'm his student at the time, so yes, of course, right? But 12 hours to learn everything about New Zealand agriculture and run his slides in metric. But apparently it worked because here I am today. But Dr. Bellow is full professor, and I'm a postdoc. And, you know, the holidays weren't that long ago, and when you go home for the holidays, what happens? You talk to your family, and they want to know, what are you doing these days and things, and they knew I graduated, so the conversation was, so you're teaching now? And then I say, well, no. And then they kind of look at me funny. But you're not a student? No. So what do you do? Right? And there's that awkward pause. And what I do is research. And the way I like to say postdoc is professor in training. So I am looking for professor positions and really excited about the opportunity to come here. And I've learned a lot the last 4 days. So I got here on Saturday, had a great, fantastic host in driving me around and learning what I can. And what we're learning and putting the mentality of biologicals into your systems, because the discussions you've been having the last 2 days are the exact same discussions we are having back home. Right? And actually, your regulation is much higher than what we currently have. So I'm sitting in the back room taking it in, thinking I'm going to have this same discussion with our Illinois growers in 10 years. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and learn from you. And hopefully now I can give a little bit of the back in the biological options. You can talk about resiliency. And we've got really good field demos yesterday about practices that can give you resiliency. Tillage options to conserve your water use. Change the planting date so that you're flowering at a time that's maybe not at the peak stress that we are starting to see in our systems these days. So that's practices. And then the other thing that we have potentially is products, right? And this is where biologicals come in. And they've been really around kind of for a while, but the big boom has been the last 5 years. And so I started on this 7 years ago with Dr. Bellow, my grad work, and we've been trying to get through this ever since. And I think we might be a few years ahead, but I think the boom is about to come here to New Zealand. And so what are these biological options? Because it seems like they come with every claim in the world, right? It's going to improve your soil health and improve your nutrient use efficiency. It's going to minimize crop stress and therefore give you higher yields. Heck, if there's enough left in the bottle at the end of the season, put it in your shampoo, and it might make your hair grow back. Yeah, I think I could sell that to a few of you. Right? But they seem to come with miracle claims. And after 7 years of working with these, one of the things that I'm excited to tell you is they can have a place. But if you want to have a success with a biological, there's a whole new understanding that we have to start thinking about to make sure we give it that chance of success. And that's what I want to talk to you today. And so we have what I call the opportunities, implications of the surging biological market. If I think of phosphorus inputs, right, most of those I can list on one hand. Same for nitrogen, it's even less for potassium, right? Very few options for those types of fertilizers. So this is designed and intended to overwhelm you. And I do not expect anyone to look at any of these logos and be able to determine the company. This came out last January, and this is all the companies that have been noted to be in the biological landscape, right? So this big loop is biopesticides. That's a big growing market, not something I'm going to touch on today. And now we have the biostimulants, inoculants, biofertilizers, right? Here's the other challenge. Every person you talk to calls it a different thing, but they're probably referring to the same category. And so I would say this half of the circle probably all groups together. It's booming. And it's the big companies, a lot of this is startups, that come together out of universities or different venture capitalist adventures, but the big companies are involved now, right? So Corteva is now in this space. I don't think Syngenta is very big here, but where we're from, Syngenta is a big seed brand. Seed. And they just bought the biggest biostimulant company that had been in this space, Valagro, out of Italy, and now they have Syngenta Biologicals. The Mosaic Fertilizer Company now has Mosaic Biosciences when they acquired Plant Response. Well, as soon as the big players started getting into this game, there's something there, and it's not going to go away overnight. So we have to be ready for it as it comes, because a lot of it is fancy, fluffy marketing, and we need to really, as farmers, understand what's real, right? What can we actually get a good success out of? And the reason it's not going away, this is a 14% expected growth rate in the revenues by 2028, right? So that's 4 years from now, 14% growth. So those selling these things love them. There are high margins on it. There's a huge amount of growth. Another reason why there's going to be continuous salespeople knocking on your doors with the next best product for the farm. And this is just a little demo I do on our sites back in Champaign. And, and fixing bacteria, phosphorus stabilizers, so these are liquids. We work with dries in all different colors and sorts, shapes, sizes. And so it's a new market, and there's a lot of options, and we have to kind of wade through that. And so one of the things that I kind of wanted to bring to you today, I could certainly sit here and go through, here's a nitrogen fixation trial and what we observed, yield responses, right? But two big things about that. That's data coming from my area in East Central Illinois, which is not that different from a climate and soils perspective to here, but it is a different system, right? We rotate with this little thing called soybean, and we don't go maize on maize. Very different soil systems when you think about the biology. And the other reason, if I went through and gave you data, by pulling data out of my talk, I don't have to convert it and think in a different unit today. So pros and cons to that. But I want to give you the tools, what you need to, if somebody comes to you with a product and there's a trade name on the front, I want you to know to ignore that, turn the bottle around, and if you can understand that active ingredient, what type of product it is, and then make the decision, could you use that on the farm, or most importantly, do you not need it? And when we talk about row crop inputs and where biologicals fit, this is the number one thing. If you're thinking about biologicals that I want you to take away today, let's see if we go here. Seed comes first, right? We had a good discussion on this. You think of products, you think biologicals, plant growth regulators, pesticides. You know that your seed is a product as well, the hybrids that you're planting. You know that your farm here in the North Island, and then might different for those that are on the South Island, you don't plant the same hybrids, right? You select the right genetics for your farm. That's essential point number one. It's expensive seed. You want to get the most out of it. We have a fertility management plan in place, right? Maximize the yield so you get the most money coming back from that original input you purchased. Now, anyone that's heard myself or Dr. Bilo talk, you will know we are in the high yield game. We are all about yield. What can we achieve? So what takes yield away is also important to remember, and you have to have a good pest management, right? We had good talks on this yesterday. Fall armyworm is starting to be a problem for us as well, and it's something that farmers are not used to having to handle and manage, but it takes yield away. Got all that money in the seed, all that money in the fertilizer, right? If you're paying the contractor, there's extra fees on top of that to get it in the ground. So those first two on the left side, or my left, your right, build yield, pests take it away. If these are not correct, I do not want to talk to you about specialty products. Now, the marketing might claim it can fix something on the farm. And I'm here to tell you, after 7 years of research, it does not. It is a next step. You need to have your basics covered, right? The pH, the fertility plan, all of that is essential. Don't forget the basics. And then we can talk specialty products. It does go full circle because maybe you're applying this as a seed treatment, right? Or in our systems, we're using these to treat residues to benefit next year's crop. More specifically, I'll put biologicals instead of specialty products. So the first, Dr. Bilo has the 7 wonders, and so I've come up with 7 recommendations to biologicals. And here's the first recommendation. Don't forget the basics. If something as simple as selecting the wrong genetic for your, what I'm learning is paddock, for us field, right? Then the whole season is off on the wrong foot, and adding something else is probably not going to give you the benefit. And so it's not a next, or they are a next step input. They will not replace management. And for those that follow the marketing, they often would say you can replace something with the biological. So this is if you take anything away from my talk today, it's this. This is pushing, and that's why this session today was titled The Future, right? Because I think a lot of our systems, we maybe aren't ready for this yet today, but after 5 years of doing different practices and getting those bases, you're probably ready for this. And we want you to be prepared for what's coming on those options. So now I've been talking, I think, about 5 minutes, right? On what are biologicals, because I really haven't told you at all, have I? Right? So at the University of Illinois, we've kind of grouped these into 3 subcategories: the plant growth regulators, the beneficial microbes, and the biostimulants. Now, anyone that follows regulatory knows that actually PGRs are very different from these 2 categories. They are regulated, and it takes a lot of dollars and research and science to get one of these labeled. It's the same amount of efforts it takes for us in the US to get a pesticide labeled, right? So we're not going to talk about those. Because in general, if a PGR comes to the farm, it's probably got good, sound science behind it. That company truly believes that product can be useful for your farm, and they're willing to put their name behind it. These 2 aren't quite regulated yet. And so companies have found different ways to get them out on market as fast as possible, with maybe less in the background. And that's why this thing is booming and where this new sector of inputs is coming from. So when I say beneficial microbes and biostimulants, I'm going to way oversimplify this as the living and the dead, right? And some people, laugh because, well, it's obvious, isn't it, right? Microbes are alive, and biostimulants, they're not the microbes, so they're the dead. Here's why this is so important. If you're working with living inoculants, they are just that, living. Now, I don't have kids, but I have 2 dogs. When I adopted the dogs, I said, I'm going to feed these dogs. I'm going to give them shelter. I mean, if anyone heard me on the virtual call 3 years ago, you might have heard a dog barking in the background. That was Hudson as a puppy. I apologize for that now, 2 years later. But I was committed to keeping them alive, right? My sister has kids. They're my nephews. She says it's the same thing for her kids. Are you willing to keep it alive? Now, when it's, 2 months before planting, and that sales rep, and you're sitting there in the shop, thinking, we're not planting yet, we got time, and they want to sell you this inoculant, and it's easy to say, yep, I am committed to working with you and ensuring your inoculant stays alive and gets through to the application point. Easy discussion when you're not in the moment of planting, right? But then you're out there planting, something happens, planter breaks down, and you're on the ground for 3 hours trying to get it running again, because there's a storm coming and the rain, and that's all you're focused on. And that 3 hours you're getting that planter fixed, that living inoculant is sitting on the side of the field, on the truck bed, in the sun. And so the first couple of hectares you planted, it was alive. The rest of the paddock, it's dead. And then you say, well, the product didn't work, right? So commitment to the living side is a full season commitment. Here's the cool thing. If you're not ready for that, we won't talk about it. We'll look at the biostimulants, right? The non-living component, something that's less picky and easier to manage. That's the exciting thing about this space, is because there are options. You're not restricted to one over the other. And we'll probably tell you that the thing we're seeing in our research is if you put them together, it might be even better. So recommendation 2, know if your product is alive or dead. And that's because some products require commitment to ensure they're viable from delivery to application. Here's the other challenge, right? You're putting faith in the company that on delivery, they also took the same commitment. Who's validating that, right? I don't know. And that might be some things coming down the chain, right? Is the delivery, however, from factory to farm, are they going to have paperwork to say that the truck was a refrigerated vehicle all the way to the exit points, things like that. But the potential that this market could have in the future, I think some of that commitment will have the value. It'll be worth the commitment for what that product can bring in our systems. But we have to know that now and not afterthought, right? After the fact, and realize, oops, probably didn't take care of that microbe like we should have, right? So what are biologicals? Now I've been talking for 7 minutes and still haven't really told you other than those 3 very vague categories, right? So it's a big open-ended question, something we've struggled with in the US in my own research. How do we get a grasp on this whole new input sector? Because I showed you how many companies are involved. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a journey through my biological research time. So here's a younger version of me, 2017, before I started researching biologicals. In the US, to get a master's degree, it takes 2 years, 2 field seasons of data to get your master's. So I started that in 2017 and said, I'm going to figure it out in 2 years. It'll be easy enough, right? Well, I didn't figure it out in my master's. I stuck out through the PhD, and about partway through that, right, I looked like this. And I don't know if that hair loss is because I'm 4 years older or trying to answer this stinking question, right? Yeah, I said I could market that one biological to you for the hair growth. I'm looking for it too, so we're on the same team here. Here's the exciting thing, right? So last year I graduated in 2022, and then through the postdoc, we finally figured it out, right? So there is a happy ending, a light at the end of the tunnel, and so there can be success. That's what is exciting about it, and we get through there. And so here they are. What I will tell you are probably the 8 most common types of biologicals you are likely to see somebody trying to sell you on the farm door. And these first 4 are your beneficial microbes, and your bottom 4 are the biostimulants. And we're going to briefly go through these. I'm going to try and summarize 7 years of research in the next 15 minutes. We'll get there. It's only 200 more slides. But one of the things I think that's also important, you saw some research plots yesterday. So when I talk to you, rather than show you data, I'm going to show you our basic conclusions from all those studies. But where do those conclusions come from? So this is just an example of our Southern Illinois research site. Here's an example of a nitrogen trial where we have some zero nitrogen check strips in there. We take a lot of pride in being able to get the accuracy down there. These are 10 rows or 4 rows wide by about 11 meters long is these plot sizes here. So when I say our research and what we've learned, this is where it's coming from. We are excited. We are going to expand this to on-farm strip work, because these types of studies give you 10 options and you figure out what 2 or 3 might be the best moving into the real world, and then you need to take those out on farm research. But this is where we come through as 11 trials on an 8-hectare block there. So walking through and fixing bacteria, these are pretty straightforward. They increase plant available N. And this is really exciting, and we'll talk about why and where it's coming from. But anyone that works with a legume, right, if it's in your rotation between the maize crops, you know that there's a value to getting that nitrogen fixation from a legume crop. But what's changed the game is products like Pivot Bio's Proven, Invita, Nutricia N, Terramax. These are examples out of the US. I understand that this market here is not quite as many options, and there's a lot more restrictions on there. But they claim to do this. Pull N2 out of the air and put it into a plant-available form, quickly reacts with water, becomes ammonium, and is feeding the plant. Right, so I breathe in and out like I do every day. 78% of that goes in and back out as N2 gas. I'm not hardwired to use it. Our plants aren't hardwired to use it. But some microbes have figured out how to do it. In our legume systems, we think about nodules, and that is a communication. Microbe gives plant nitrogen, plant gives microbe carbon. Grass crops don't do that. Your wheat crops don't do this either. But this is the potential and where it's going. But these are all N fixers. So right, I said biologicals are general, and N fixers is one level of specification. It gets deeper than that. Pivot Bio, unfortunately, I don't think you will see in the near 5 to 10 years. Right, so they've done something to the microbes. This process takes a lot of energy. It's really expensive for the microbes to do that. So they fix enough N until they have enough, and then they stop until they need more, right? You eat a meal, your stomach tells your brain I'm full, so you stop eating until you get hungry again, right? And there's usually 1 or 2 days a year where we ignore that signal, right? You've been eating, you've been feasting, and your stomach tells your brain you're full, and you say, that's fine, dessert's coming, I'm going to ignore that, right? For us, it's Thanksgiving here, probably Christmas, right? Like I said, 2 years. I love that I can ignore that signal Thanksgiving and Christmas. But they've turned that switch off on the microbes. So the microbe fixes N. It says it's supposed to say, I'm done, I'm giving up, till I need more. But they've turned that signal off, and it's always fixing N as long as the exudates are able to sustain the energy requirement. Really cool concept. Makes these things a little more viable from a actually supplying nitrogen perspective. But because it's been edited, probably off your market, at least for the time being. These two here are both what we call endophytes. So these live on the root, by the way. They're doing this system down here. These two you can spray on the leaves, and they fix that nitrogen in the leaf, right? Plants are really good at what process? Photosynthesis. They're always sending gas in and out of the leaves. And guess what? We don't talk about it. N2 gas goes in and out of the leaves, just like it goes in and out of my lungs. So if you put the microbe in the leaves, they can then do this in the leaf. That's pretty cool. But you have a list of microbial species that you are allowed to have as inoculants. And that list was, I need to get the actual date on this. Somebody may know the date that list was put together. But these microbes were discovered after you guys built that list. So they're not on the list, so I don't believe they're available to you yet. Now, they're natural microbes, untweaked, unedited, but until they get approved for the list to import, these may be off the option. And then Terramax is a different style. It's an azospirillum. It's a free liver. So it does the same thing as this guy, but it's unedited, and it just fixes N in the root zone as it goes. So just because they're all N fixers They're not all the same. So the third recommendation I have, know what biological you are working with. And not just is it an N fixer, but how does it do that? Is it an endophyte in the leaves? Is it in the roots? That may change what you can add to the spray tank, right? So if you're putting the endophyte out, maybe it doesn't like to go out with a certain micronutrient or a certain herbicide or fungicide. Things that I don't have the answers to, but we have to be questioning and making sure that somebody does before you take the risk on the farm. So in general, with N fixers, biologically fixed nitrogen from applied, it can improve maize yields. I've seen it. And grain yields, I'm going to tell you right now, is where I come from. We have done VT-R1 biomass, and we've seen increases in vegetated biomass. So I think this translates to the silage market as well. Actually, sometimes we see an advantage at VT biomass and no grain yield. Not sure, I can't fully explain that today, but there's definitely something there. This is a generalization. Dave and I had a lot of discussion on this, right? So one of the things in the US, they're marketed to replace nitrogen. That proven. They claim that it's worth about 45 kilogram N per hectare equivalent, and that you can remove that from your synthetic N inputs. I'm telling you, it doesn't produce that much N yet today. And if you remove your N input, hoping the microbe can supplement, are you just lowering the yield ceiling? So we talked about resiliency. And when we think about N fixers, it's a new source of nitrogen but does not replace it. Balance management. Why is that so important? Where does nitrogen for maize come from? It's about 50-50 from your fertilizer, right? So we use a lot of anhydrous in the US, but I know urea is fairly common here, or the soil. And I would argue here you've got richer soils than we do, and so this might actually be 60-40, 70-30, but that depends upon the weather, so we have to keep that in mind. But two sources, right? So I know in the US we've been growing maize longer than here, but we still only have two sources of nitrogen for our crop. If we could make a third source, that would just be something that is exciting and the potential down the road. And one of the things that I would argue against marketing, this is why I like being a researcher, because I can challenge the marketing a little bit. They claim replacement. This is the problem, right? You do everything you can. You don't want that nitrogen to be lost. We know that, okay? But the weather does what the weather does. And so sometimes it's susceptible to loss. So the N-fixing microbe might be able to supplement that nitrogen where the fertilizer was lost or the soil didn't mineralize that year. And so if you pull back too much, you may actually lower the yield potential, lower the ceiling. So in general, right, this all depends on systems. You need a good base start if you're looking for decent yields. And this is on the grain yield side. So that's our experience with N-fixers. It's a third source of nitrogen. Really exciting, but not quite at replacement level. So the fourth recommendation, they're a third source with today's products, helping to supplement when soil or fertilizer falls short. And if you cut the N rate too much, you might actually lower the ceiling. That plant reads the soil. It says, I know how much nitrogen I can work with. I can set the potential. Right? And then you pull fertilizer away, and it says, whoa, last year I had this much. Now you're telling me I have this much. I'm going to be lazy and only go for this level of yield. So that's kind of where we're at on that. And I think checking in on time, got about 10 minutes? Perfect. So that's the N-fixers. That's what's created a lot of the buzz to start. I'd say 2017, 2018, kind of that's what opened the US market. But they're not the only ones out there, right? And so I did spend a majority of my talk on this category for a reason, right? There's a lot of potential in nitrogen management. Here's an atmospheric source, right? So you think about, carbon input and all the carbon you have to produce to ship the fertilizer, produce the fertilizer, ship it to the farm, then apply it. These don't have any of the diesel costs and the manufacturing side of it. So the potential upside is there. But I'm just warning you, as a researcher, I can do this stuff. I don't know if it's quite ready for full commercialization. But we're talking about the future. 5-10 years, different discussion. And maybe I can come back and we can update you on the next 5 to 10 years of research, right? Phosphorus solubilizing, increasing availability of mineral phosphorus. Our soils are loaded in phosphorus, both here and in the US, but the problem is it's stuck. Things like cations, aluminum, calcium, zinc. It's just not plant available. So what these microbes do, and they're in your systems naturally, so we'll have that discussion moving forward as well. You put these bacteria, right, that's the predominant. There's a couple fungus that do this too. And they release it, and now it's plant available. And I'm going to summarize what we tend to find in our research, because we've tried different application methods and sources and styles. The key thing with the phosphorus solubilizers, we like in furrow, and for us this is on the seed, in the trench, with the planter, a liquid source, not in a 5x5 scenario. Although I believe 5x5 might work, and we'll talk about why. Because you have to optimize it with adequate soil contact near the root. 2 reasons for this. You need soil contact so the microbe can actually find the phosphorus. And you need root contact because as soon as it's released, how fast till it's tied back up? So can you give proximity that it's almost like a direct handoff? I don't have to run across the room to give that phosphorus to the plant if I can just hand it right next door. And so proximity is the key to success. We do a Y-drop application in the US where we liquid along the row at about V9. And we tried to Y-drop these guys. Why not? And then they sat on the soil surface in a drought year, never worked into the root zone, no yield advantage whatsoever. So is the conclusion there that the product did not work? Or is the conclusion the product never got the opportunity to do its job? A little different perspective on biologicals to think about the biology and ensuring you give them what they need. And we have seen it can enhance phosphorus uptake with these products, so maybe enhance fertilizer efficiency. This is the fun part for me where I challenge the marketing. They're going to claim this can release soil phosphorus, so you need less fertilizer phosphorus. Here's the cool thing about this, though. If you put it with the fertilizer, it's like a bodyguard. And the microbe chelates the cations before they can even get to your fertilizer. And it stays available. So marketing says replace your nutrients. I'm saying make sure that your nutrients actually get to the plant and increase the efficiency. You don't need to cut rates, and then everything in the system goes up, right? That's a win-win. The solution to pollution is dilution, right? If you apply fertilizer, we want it in the plant, and then we're good to go. It's not really running off in the soils. So I think these are a play to enhance fertilizer efficiency, not mine your soils, because the other thing is you mine your soils for 10 years, you hand it over to the next generation, and you've took all that left. What do they do? But exciting about it, and this one actually we've had really good success putting it with fertilizer and seeing a benefit to the fertilizer by itself without cutting rates. So the fifth recommendation, if you're talking phosphorus, it needs to be near the root though. I mean, it doesn't move very far, very fast. And so because of this, just as fast as it's released, it might be bound up, and then you just gotta hedge your bets and give you the best chance of success. This next category, mycorrhizal fungi, extends the root system. We're not going to talk about that much today. These have actually been around. I wouldn't say these are new in concept. Anyone that studies forests know they're abundant in AMF. No-till tends to build AMF communities. They enhance the root system, better soil exploration, a lot of potential there. And now you can inoculate them. Some people say if they're already in my system, why should I buy the inoculant? It's like giving it a head start, putting the inoculant right there from the get-go so it can get moving a little faster than the natives, give you a little bump. Residue decomposition, we're going to briefly touch on this. This is the next big frontier I'm seeing in the US. The new launch of products are in this space. They go after organic nutrition. It's a little different, right? So in silage, you remove a lot of that biomass for feed, value there. But in our world, a lot of that goes back out the other end of the combine. And can you recycle the nutrition, right? So I hope I don't talk to any fertilizer dealers right now. But the concept here is why not buy a fertilizer input once and use it twice? Last year's crop and re-release it again for this year's crop. Makes sense to me. In general, these are bacillus, right? So here are 4 of the most common types of bacillus that I see in these products. I'm told, David, there's a Yeti cooler for the farmer that can pronounce each of these first try. Stand up, right? Yeah. The best bet is say bacillus, and then the rest, we'll just write it down. Yeah. So I think it took me 3 years to figure out how to pronounce this one correctly. So, but these are what you're looking at. Like I said, if you can ignore the trade name, turn it around and look for this. That'll tell you what you're working with. In general, these things are kind of tricky, right? They're naturally occurring. Again, goes the question, why would I pay for it if I've already got it? They produce proteins and enzymes that cycle residues, nutrient cycling. They can sometimes just be plant symbionts, right? They do a lot of different things. Sometimes they're biopesticides, and sometimes, depending on the conditions, they do one mechanism over the other. So each year, the same product might do something different. And sometimes they just stimulate the soil microbes as well. It's like just putting a cheerleader out there and the whole team does better. So we've seen success there. But in the residue decomposition world, or anything that you're applying to residues, there's a key thing here. They need time to get there. And especially here, right, you have a much higher potency for the UV in the sun than we do in the States. If you spray in the morning and those microbes are sitting on the soil surface all day in the hot sun, by the end of the day, are they still alive? Right? So we tend to spray in the evening so that they have overnight to work in, or morning dew works them in, protect them as best we can. Again, living things, commitment, give them the chance to get to the work site so that they don't get stopped on the way and can't perform. So just some considerations there. It's easy for me to tell that to the farmer. The farmer says, yeah, but I got a bunch of other stuff to do, right? Especially in your livestock. There's a lot of management there that you can't just ignore, and sometimes you just go when you can. Understand those challenges for sure. Enzymes, phosphatases particularly, so the microbes that do residue decomposition do it by creating enzymes. And the cool thing is the enzymes themselves are not alive. We're seeing the market largely in the phosphorus reason. You know, when you talk about phosphorus management, you dig a soil test, and that's the readily extractable P. How many of you talk about the organic phosphorus in your nutrient management plans? Right, in the US, we ignore it completely. And what we're finding in the US is 50% or more of all the phosphorus in our soil is in the organic form, and we don't talk about it. And here it is, right? Phosphate in organic matter, plant unavailable. Here's the phosphatase enzymes. It grabs a hold of that, releases it, and now it's plant available. It's like Pac-Man. Every time open, close his mouth, new phosphate. Here's the cool thing about this. These aren't actually alive. You know, those phosphorus solubilizers, they solubilize phosphorus because they need it, and then the plant hopefully gets what's left. In this case, it's just free-for-all because they're not actually living. And so the next two categories I kind of moved through because they've kind of been around. I know some of you were dabbling in this, right? Humic fulvics, they can chelate cations, you know, those phosphorus solubilizers. This is what they produce to do their job. And the carbon could feed microbes. The challenge here is, right, we've got liquids at low dose. I'm talking liter to the hectare. And I work with a granule that I put out at about 500 kilograms to the hectare. Right, so there's another hour-long talk just on that category alone. But we're seeing some good excitement here, largely around potassium. I'd be happy at lunch to talk that story with people moving forward. Alginates, marine extracts, protein hydrolysates, foliar stress mitigation. These are your drought mitigators, right? It's telling the plant that drought's coming, build a defense, and be ready for it. There's your resiliency strategy. Or you put in the soil, it's just a bunch of goodies for the microbes. And then sugars. Right, so I don't know if you're doing much sugar work. In the US, farmers think put it foliar because it helps move the nutrients into the leaves. I've tried that, and I've been one phenomenal success. Haven't been able to repeat it since. But when we put it in the soil, we're actually getting a pretty good consistent success. So here's why I struggle with foliar sugars, right? The Goldilocks principle. I don't know if that's we've got a common little fairy tale back home about Goldilocks and three bears. Walks into the house, and there's a porridge bowl, and that one's too cold. Goes to the next porridge bowl, that one's too hot. The third porridge bowl, just right. How do you know how your plant is feeling today? Right? So this year at V4, you need to put 5 kilograms of sugar to the hectare to be the optimum. But next year, it's actually V8, 6 kilograms to meet the optimum. How do you predict that? That's the challenge. That's a moving target. That's why I struggle on foliar inputs of the biostimulant or the sugar side. But in furrow, it's like a fake root exit. I'm really excited about that because the consistent thing about planting application, what do you not have in the ground that the microbes are looking for? An active root system, right? Microbes love root exudates. And at planting, it's like 3 to 4 weeks before there's any root exudates. So maybe a sugar in furrow is like a fake root exudate. We're seeing more consistent success putting them in the soil than trying to foliar feed. So keep that in mind. So the seventh recommendation, stress-mitigating biostimulant has to be proactive. I get up every morning and I watch the weather forecast, and I know the 10-day forecast that's coming. How many of you have cable TV set up for your maize crops so it can read the weather coming down in 10 days? Right? But I see that in 5 days I'm going to have a heat wave, so in 2 days I spray it, gives the plant 3 days to build the defense, and then it has the opportunity to tolerate the stress. Proactive. So in general, biologicals can be effective at increasing grain yields. We've seen it in our research. But it depends on what type of product you're using. And if you really want to optimize the benefit, you have to know how the product works. Don't let somebody just say, put it on this block of 2 hectares and see what happens, okay? You may not need it for that 2 hectares, but maybe you needed it for the other 2 hectares on the other field. And so where's your starting point and have a goal, right? So sometimes people say, Connor, what product should I try? Wrong question. Why do you want to use a biological? Now we'll go find the right tool for the job. That's the key thing. Do not let a sales rep say, just throw it on this small patch and see what happens. Good chance it won't have an effect because you don't need what that product does. And real quick, because I'm about to get the hook as well here, how do you sort through it though, right? So many options. You know you need an end fixer, but how do you know who to go to? What do you start to do to feed through it, right? You hear the term snake oil, right? We call a snake oil that works a viper lipid. But how do you find the viper lipids, right? So what does the product do? Oh, it fixes nitrogen. Okay, how does it do that? Endophyte, in the root? Challenge the reps a little bit. What handling procedures are needed? If the answer is it should be okay if you do that, they don't know, right? So don't be their guinea pig. You know, can I store it this way? You should be able to. Nope, I'm out, right? That's a red flag. If you know exactly how I should handle the product, then I trust that you know your product. What is it compatible with? This is any ag input. We know this one, so why not ask what's it not compatible with? Do you know that? right? And many of the companies I work with have a list, and if they don't know what's not compatible with, I'm out, right? Don't be their guinea pig. Don't mix it with some fertilizer they've never seen before and hope it works. Which acres? Sorry, that should be hectares. There's the one mistake I missed on that one. The answer is almost never the whole farm, right? These things are more like the variable rate type stuff. And what's the shelf life? And is it both unopened and open? Probably changes. Make sure they know that. And then this is just working with people one-on-one. If they have confidence in the replies and honesty when they don't know, they probably believe in what they're trying to sell you on the farm and something worth trying. And with that, special thanks. If we don't have time for questions, I'm not running away. They've got my flight ticket hold, so I can't get out of here too fast. But thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Connor. I think we've got time for maybe one question. There's just one over in the corner.
In terms of your research, have you found that at a certain organic matter percentage in the soil, the biologicals have less of a return?
Yep, so the question is, does the organic matter of your soil give a better chance of success or not? I don't have enough data to directly tell you yes or no. On one hand, you would think low organic matter soil, better response. Little bit goes a long way. On the other hand, high organic matter soil, that biological has all the food in the world to do its job. And maybe it just has more to work with. I wish I had a good answer for you. It's one of the things we're just too young to know that specifically, but definitely something to consider, because I could argue for both sides today just from the biology perspective. In general, I think one rule of thumb, pH is another one to consider. And if the conditions are good for the crop, they're probably good for the microbes. If that soil is not healthy for the crop, or that crop is stressed, probably have stressed microbes too. But great question, one I don't have a direct answer for today.
Okay, so Connor is going to be about for the next week or so, not necessarily here, but he's moving. I think you're doing a talk down in the Manawatu area, is that correct? Tomorrow as well. So Connor's with us for a while. Thank you very much, Connor, for contributing to our conversation today. It's fantastic. So much appreciated.